Hey guys, how you doing today? Thank you so much for joining me on this week's episode of Jake Makes. Today, I'm going to be trying to solve a very important problem in my life. See, in life, there are these things called, like, social standards, and they're really, really dumb, okay? Like, one of them is that you have to look a certain way. Like, you have to shower and clean yourself, for one, which, don't get me started. Things like responsibility and socializing, not spending all day in a shop. The world we live in, I mean, good grief. But I guess you have to, like, abide by these social standards if you live in the world, so. It's like I'm supposed to have money. And the problem with money is it's not easy to come by. You can make it, but that's heavily frowned upon for one reason or another. And then you have to work for it, and that works fine. I mean, I'm not against work at all. I love work. But you kind of have work. And I don't right now. So the only other option is to build something and sell it, which I hate doing, but you gotta do what you gotta do to survive in today's cold, cruel world, full of social norms. In all seriousness, I am running a bit low on money right now, so I'm going to do something I've never done before, which is make and sell some knives to get a little bit of extra cash. So all that to say, welcome to Jake's ultimate comprehensive guide to how to make a railroad spike knife. Alright, now before we get started, there's something very important you must know about railroad spikes. Unlike men, not all railroad spikes are created equal. You see, there are two main kinds of railroad spikes. There is high carbon railroad spikes, and then there is low carbon railroad spikes. You can tell the difference often just by looking at them, because the high carbon ones will be covered in rust, while the low carbon ones will remain suspiciously rust free. Why? Because carbon in steel causes it to rust at a ridiculously higher rate than low carbon steel. Now, before I have all the real knife makers come crawling out of the woodworks to eat me, let me explain that high carbon railroad spikes are still not high carbon at all. Carbon is put in iron to make it harden. That's part of what makes it steel. Now, the amount of carbon needed to harden a knife to regular knife making standards is about 0.60%. For instance, knife making steel, like 1095. That letter designates that there is 0.95% carbon in the steel. That's very high carbon. 1080, same thing. 1060, same thing. 0.60% carbon in steel. Now, to get it hard as it should be, you need at least 1050 or above. The high carbon railroad spikes are only at most 0.30%. That's a lot less than you would want for a good knife. But if heat treated correctly, even with 0.30% carbon in the steel, they will actually hold an edge pretty well. Are they going to be up to normal knife standards? No, they're not going to hold an edge as long. They're going to bend, ding a little bit easier, but they are still far, far harder than just mild steel with no carbon in it. And in my experience with the railroad spike knives I've made in the past, they actually don't perform too bad. Just so you know right off the bat though, no railroad spike knife, unless you're putting a actual super high carbon steel edge into it, is going to perform nearly as well as a regular high carbon steel knife. They're more of a novelty, and the people that buy them should know that. The other way of differentiating the high carbon from the low carbon railroad spikes is the high carbon ones are stamped HC on the head, while the low carbon ones are stamped MC on the head. HC obviously stands for high carbon, MC obviously stands for mostly crap. For real. As far as design goes, I have a pretty good design I already drew up probably a year ago. We're gonna have forged scale finish all over it, except for the blade part, which is gonna be ground clean, shiny, schmancy. And then we're gonna have some cool twists in the handle. You twist it one way, let that cool, then heat again, twist it the other way, back and forth. Gives it a kind of cool, weird, unsymmetrical look. I don't know, I'm gonna try it out, see how it works. we're gonna start off by forging out flat and drying out the blade section. After the blade section is all forged out, flat, clean, whatnot, then we're gonna twist the handle. Alright, here's where we're at right now. As you can see, the blade's completely finished being forged out. Now we're going to move on to the handle. We're going to heat the handle up, stick it in the vise, grab it with the wrench, and twist it around. Okie dokie. I keep trying to do the weird twist thing where it's kind of, you twist it one way and then you twist it back and it kind of does the weird thing. Well, it's not really working because I can't only heat up very small certain sections of it because I have a big forge. I think to do the design I drew out, you'd have to have a torch that could isolate a certain little small section at a time, which I can't do. So instead I'm just going to do the regular twist. All the shaping is done. What I'm doing now is just the final finishing out, straightening up the blade, giving a few little curves here and there, kind of bending the handle in, making it more comfortable, cleaning up the scale, all the little stuff, and then we'll be done with the forging and go into the grinding. Alright, so now we're in the shop once again. This thing looks real ugly. It's got a lot of rust on it for some reason, and the scale is really nasty. There's some loose scale. So what we're gonna do is stick this in the vise and take a wire wheel to it to clean it up and make it look a lot prettier before we go on to grind the bevels. This is important to making it look good at this stage, to wire wheel it off. Otherwise, it just doesn't look good. Okay, so I feel like a total idiot right now. Sometimes it's hard to tell the two different kinds of spikes apart. I just erased it, but you know, the MC versus the HC. I don't know how, but I've been forging on the wrong kind of spike. And yeah, I feel like a total idiot. So look at this. You can tell just by the color of them. Check out the difference in the color of the scale. This is a actual railroad spike knife I've made before. That's the higher carbon steel. And you can see how the scale is actually darker versus this one, where you can see the scale is lighter colored. The lighter colored ones are the MC. The darker ones that looked more like normal steel are the good ones. When it had some rust on it, I kind of thought it looked like an H, so I went, okay, cool. But now that I look at it, it actually looks more like an M. Another way to tell them apart is you can see the difference in the material on the head. The high carbon ones are smooth generally, while these ones are more bumpy and uneven. They've got more imperfections on them, as you can tell. I don't know why that is. Anyway, I completely forged out a whole railroad spike knife out of the wrong kind of railroad spike. Ah, so stupid. guess we'll have to start over. And now I've forged out another one, which took another little while. Next step is to start profiling the blade. The blade profile is pretty much already there. You can already tell the shape it's going to be. Modified Wharncliffe, drop point, something like that. I went up to 400 grit on the spine and on the different parts in here. Gives it everything a nice polish, a nice shine. Next we're going to take it and stick it in the vise so I can file in a quick coil. When doing a bevel prior to heat treat, you want to make sure and leave a little bit of metal on the edge of the knife. You don't want to go all the way down to the actual edge and create an edge before heat treat, because it will either warp or damage that edge during the heat treat, which we're going to do heat treat right now. So let's go outside and get into that. Basic heat treating is a very simple process, but it can appear very complicated, so let me run you through it as simply as I can. Basically, steel needs to be hardened before it can hold an edge well. All knives have been hardened before. The hardening process involves a quench in which you heat the knife up to about 1475 degrees, I can't remember exactly, till it's glowing red hot. Then you dunk it in oil, and that cools it down very, very quickly, which actually changes the molecular structure of the steel and makes it very, very hard. After that, it's actually too hard to be a knife, so then you have to soften it down a little bit. You do that by heating it up again slowly in an oven or something like that, up to about 400 degrees. So you harden it up really, really hard, and then you kind of soften it back down till it's just right in the middle for a knife. Now, usually with good high carbon steel, you would want to quench in oil. It's less harsh of a steel. If you quench regular good high carbon knife steel in water, it'll actually harden it up too much, and the blade will often crack in the quench, and you don't want that to happen because broken blades are terrible. But because these railroad spikes have very, very low carbon content, I'm going to quench in water to get them as hard as I possibly can. Not a good idea with regular knife steel. For a railroad spike knife, I'm going to give it a shot, and it'll probably work better than just oil. Alright, next step is to temper it. I'm going to do something differently than I would do on a normal knife. Because this is such low carbon, I'm going to actually leave the edge section completely untempered, and I'm going to only heat up the spine because it's already lower carbon, so the edge already isn't going to be super, super hard. I'm just going to leave it the hardness it is now. Hopefully that's not too hard. And that is how you make a railroad spike knife. Thanks so much for watching this episode of Jake Makes. That's about all we got for today. If you are interested in purchasing this knife, I'll have a link down below to wherever I'm going to be selling it. Go now, get off your behind, get off YouTube, go build something awesome. I did a poll over on my community page on what my next project should be. I gave y'all 3 amazing options. The air rifle got almost all the votes, so that's what I'm going to be building. I'm super excited for this. I've always wanted to do this particular project. It's going to be really great. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss it. It's going to be awesome. I can't wait. Anyway, until then, Jake out.